There's so much confusion and distortion and increasing polarization about what the feminine is, the nature of female power, and the role that the feminine plays in our reality, especially as we make the transition from the old consciousness to the new. We each have our own personal ratio of feminine and masculine, and the struggle for control of the narrative of the feminine can affect all of us. It can result in bewilderment and uncertainty, causing shame, inner conflict, and suppression of the authentic expression of self. In this episode, we discuss the journey of the feminine through 4 archetypes that appear in many different traditions, and what the lessons, gifts, and challenges are of each archetype from frequency perspective. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. By releasing the distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, we can start to release what no longer serves us and gain greater clarity and ease with the wholeness of the unique expression of ourselves. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing the journey through the feminine.
Journeying through the feminine. That's an interesting journey. Because we do have kind of 4 distinct passageways through that journey, right? And each one has a significance, I think, anyways. Now being in the 4th stage of my journey. And it would be really interesting to discuss at a frequency level the value of each passage.
Totally.
And what it actually means for us as a feminine force.
Yes, and I agree with that. And what I will say about this is that we're talking about the feminine. So it doesn't mean you have to be a woman, okay? We all have within us both the masculine and the feminine, okay? So if you're a woman, you have both the feminine and the masculine within you, and the same if you're a man, you both. It's the proportion of them will be different for each of us, and how much we identify with those forces within us or that are us changes depending on who you are. So I'm talking, and this is really for people who identify more with the feminine, right? So in that percentage or that between the two, I would say that. So whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter what physical body you're in. Makes sense? Because there's some women who, for example, have more of a proportion of the masculine with them than the feminine. Right? And men vice versa. So I just wanted to clarify that. And then the other thing I'm just going to mention is that the reason we're talking about this is because there's so much distortion at each of these stages of the feminine, okay, based in the old consciousness. And part of what we're doing is to talk about the importance, as you mentioned, of each of these stages. And as we clarify each of these stages within us, because we all have, especially as we get older, all 4 of these things within us, the clearer and higher your resonance is, because your expression of yourself with that association with the feminine gets clearer and brighter.
And I always think that when we make peace or find neutrality or feel the empowerment of each passage, which for me didn't come at the time of that stage, but it now sitting, I think if I knew and understood the wisdom of each passage, then I could be more of service to my family, to the wider circle. It's a gift, really. Hindsight, they say, hindsight's great, but really, can we not just have it, right at the beginning? And then it got me thinking about the whole dynamics of the role of the woman in her feminine, as you say, because I really respect the other women that identify as a different force, I guess. I don't like the use of masculine and feminine.
I don't either. It's pretty polarized, actually, even in the discussion of it. It's actually much more fluid. And I think that that's starting to be expressed more in younger people, right? Because their identity is more fluid. It's gender fluid, right? And I feel like a lot of us that are older have these sort of like blocked in ideas of like, it's masculine or feminine and this is the, you know what I mean? It's never changed. It's like more rigid. Whereas I feel like a lot of younger people these days, it's more fluid. And I actually feel like it is more fluid. You know what I mean? If we were really allowed to be in the clarity of who we are.
Yeah. Okay, so for the position I'm in now, and looking back, and I look back at, let's just discuss what the 4 stages are. Should we start there maybe? Because that sometimes we're not really sure what they are.
Yeah.
We get so bogged down by one of them that we can't recognize the others. You know?
So you and I have discussed it. Now, there's many archetypes that are discussed about the feminine, right? The journey through the feminine. And so for the purposes of our discussion today, what we're talking about is the girl, or the little girl, and then the temptress, because as the girl grows up and discovers her own sexuality, her power within that, there's the temptress, you know, and then comes the mother, okay? And whether or not you have children is not relevant. And then after the mother is the crone, or the wise woman. That's another way that people talk about that archetype. And so for our discussion today, those are the 4 stages. And I think it's interesting to talk about each of them because in our culture, each of them are distorted to a large degree. It's fascinating. So I think we'll start there, right?
Yeah. Because as you say it as well, I mean, the mother, well, it's oftentimes the nurturer.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the mother, something's happened, like you say, distortions have happened, that she doesn't know how to function as a mother. And oftentimes it's the partner that moves in to become the nurturer, right? So
I think of the mother actually as the nurturer and the champion. Because they're both. Because a lot of people, and we'll start at the beginning, but I think a lot of people think of the mother as just the nurturing, but it's also a strong mother is a champion. She's like, you're going to get strong. Right? She doesn't want to have weak children. She wants them to be strong. She wants them to be independent. She wants them to be happy. I mean, that's a mother who is empowered, is to have children who are strong. You don't want to create children who are weak.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The little girl. The little girl that's full of fun and mischief and wants to play and create and dreams. Okay, so where are we serving that? Or where are we not serving that little force of energy?
Well, I think that a lot of times, whether you're a boy or a girl, and when we're in that little space of being a child, we kind of like, we actually are more gender fluid because we're just exploring. Right? It doesn't mean anything to us. So we're like, I don't know what it means to be a boy and I don't know what it means to be a girl. So let's kind of like figure out what all that means. A lot of times, you know, girls and boys will be chastised for being emotional, right? Like you're being too much like a girl, you're being a sissy, you don't do that kind of thing. So emotionality is downplayed. And I also think that it's kind of, for me anyway, a lot of, when I was growing up in my generation, I feel a lot of the girls were being raised by women who didn't want their girls to be dependent on a man. Because they're like, our mothers were like, you have an opportunity to not rely on a man, to be strong and not ever, ever be at a man's mercy. Okay, because you can get an education, you can get a job, you can earn money, you can be safe and free. If you know what I mean? Like because you can do this. I couldn't do this. I had to marry a man, right, in order to have that quote unquote safety. But you, my daughter, can rise above that. Okay, so I think a lot of women, at least in my journey with other women who are in a similar age group, have that in us. And so I think a lot of, we were often taught to be, strong and like focused and career-oriented and successful. And, we were like kind of like pushed in that direction so that we could be safe and we could be independent and free from a financial standpoint. There was a lot of that happening with our moms. And if you understand where their positions were, so precarious, didn't have the opportunities, couldn't work for salaries that were meaningful, all that sort of stuff. Of course, they're like pushing their girls to be like, don't be in the same position of weakness than I was. So there was a little bit less time for play. And there was a little bit less time for magic and those things that are kind of girl-oriented. Does that make sense? In terms of that freedom to be a little bit more silly. That's what I feel like. So that playfulness was sort of like funneled often into seriousness, so that we could be safe.
And coming from my culture, I grew up playing with boys. Loved playing with boys and loved just playing and being outside and singing and dancing. But I too, I'm that generation where you get an education, you get a good job, and yada, 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 and to the point where I was kind of scared of men in the end. It's this, these scary men, I've got to make sure that they'll never come near me. And yet I loved playing with them, and we had fun. We had fun creating and making things, and I was also very much aware as a young lass that that's boys' toys, that's girls' toys.
Yes.
And I liked the boys' toys. They had Lego.
Yeah, well, they had cars that were battery operated.
Cars, yeah.
Hello, they had a big wheel.
And the label tomboy. Do you remember that? Like, what, a girl got have fun with these things?
Exactly.
So it took me a long time to make peace with that tomboy.
Yeah.
Like, wow, it's like a bad thing.
Yeah, and also it's interesting because if in our generation anyway, if you. For me, I didn't actually fit with the hyper girly girls because I was more like you. You know, I wanted to, be outside, run around, like, just I wasn't super into like my hair and makeup and all that sort of stuff. Like that wasn't really within what I was interested in at that time. Yeah. So I think that the little girl is really important because in our culture, she's supposed to be very innocent and sweet and pure. Okay, I don't know who came up with that paradigm because I don't know if you've met little girls, but they can be quite manipulative and quite conniving and quite aware of their power.
Oh, yeah. Very much so.
So we had this idea wrapped around like purity around girls and what that's supposed to be, like they're chaste and pure and all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of an odd thing, like an odd heaviness that's put on little girls.
It's very distorting.
Yes,
very. For me, if you don't mind me moving into the next passage, it was really distorting because I'm moving into this stage where all these things are happening to my body. Yeah. And I felt like I had to be really masculine, and couldn't do these girly things because there was no power in them. It couldn't be this, girly thing, image that otherwise it made me inadequate some way. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that sort of purity that we wrap around the little girl is distorted when you come into the temptress. Okay, so like 16, 17, 18, when you start to like feel your sexual energy, the power that your sexual energy has, because not every girl, many women, when they enter that stage, become aware that they're having an impact on men. Yeah. Typically. And so, but you have this idea that you're supposed to be pure. Yeah. Right? And so here you are coming into sexuality, coming into sexual energy. And so it's strange because our culture is very much about this weird polarization between hypersexuality and like hyper chasteness. Yep. And so it's very distorting, I think, for a lot of young women when they enter this stage because they have all the sexual energy running, which is supposed to make them powerful in some way, but yet often puts them in a state of victim because they don't really know how to use it. Yeah. Right? They get into abusive situations because they're trying to get attention or love or acceptance, and they're using their sexuality to get it, and then, losing, interest, like the other person losing interest in them and then feeling low self-worth, like all that stuff is in there. Yeah. And there's this whole idea of like sluttiness, right? This idea like that you're not pure. Yeah. So it's this very weird thing, I feel like, that happens in this temptress. And a lot of women move away from it because in our culture, it like that whole slutty thing is discouraged. It's like you're allowed to be sexualized to a certain degree and that's it.
That's right.
It's supposed to be wrapped in this little box. And if you go outside of that little box, it's not very appropriate to be wielding your sexual energy.
That's right. You get shamed.
You get shamed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Shamed. It's really sad. And I think if I look back and even now when I'm watching it, men don't know what to do with that. Yeah. It's really sad because can you imagine you have two beings that are moving into their sexual power and it's a power. Yes. It's a force that runs through us. It's incredibly energetic. It's incredibly creative, right? And then you have two beings that want to come together, man, woman, 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 man, man, and they have no idea what to do with this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because it's become so distorted and so objectified, I guess,
Yes.
and plagiarized in a way.
Yeah.
You know, by Hollywood and by media. And
yeah, it's true. And I think like I said, in our culture, so it's strange. I feel when I tap into the culture and the resonance of the temptress, so it's interesting because on the one hand, she's supposed to be very attractive, right? So there's this weird focus on beauty in a very specific way. Okay, and a lot of women get caught in trying to conform to that beauty standard.
Yep.
Okay, and it's almost like the culture perpetuates that beauty standard for that point forward in a woman's life.
Yeah.
Okay, so even if the woman's like 70, there's a reference back to the temptress, right? The young one, the one who's like hypersexual.
Yep.
Because that's the standard of beauty. But yet, like we said, if that woman tries to really fully embody her sexuality, then there's shaming. And a lot of women, I find, will get into trouble sometimes, you know, because they don't know how to deal with the power dynamic.
Yeah.
You know, so women who get into situations where there's sexual assault, or women who go the opposite way and become very masculine because they're trying to protect themselves. You know, that's what I did, actually. I actually defeminized myself because I was like, okay, I can see the amount of power I have, and I don't really know what to do about it. I'm kind of afraid of it, actually.
Yeah.
Because I can't control that response. Like I can start that response, but then I'm like, I don't know, I don't know what to do with that now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I would go hypermasculine, but it's weird because for women in that case, they're also, it's funny, there is a devaluation at that stage of the crone, of the wise woman.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's so much emphasis on the youth and the sexuality. So it's almost like the wise woman or the crone is something you want to avoid.
Yeah.
Because then you're old, valueless, and not useful.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. It starts at that point.
Yeah. It's really odd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what I experienced was that, so I'm coming through that stage of my exploration of my temptress. Even that word, right? When you think about it, isn't there a nicer word?
I don't,
you know?
Yeah, I know.
Do you know?
But there is no nice word for it because it's a female word.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the word witch. There's no word, like, do you ever, you know what I mean? There's like, what's the feminine, like what, it's so charged, it's so negative, you know what I mean? And it's so like definitely, so there's no, do you see what I'm saying? There's no word for temptress that's not somehow tainted with sluttiness.
Yeah, because it sounds so religious.
Yeah.
You know, you're a temptress, you are Eve that caused this whole affliction in the Bible.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think that the other thing too is that as we come into temptress, there's very little emphasis on wisdom in terms of how to hold your sexual power. And I feel that that's something that's really missing.
Yeah, and how to engage it.
Yeah.
Engage it in a manner that's non-threatening.
Yeah.
But encourages or invites the person to create together.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think because there's so much, like, it's funny, like we are so polarized in our culture, so much negation of the temptress, especially beyond a certain point, that a lot of women shut that down. But the thing is, the temptress is the one who, like, is the one who invites others to collaborate, to play, to explore, to create something new, to to adventure, to what all that stuff. You need the temptress because she's the one who initiates that. But yet a lot of us are afraid of that, you know, especially as we get into the mother and the crone. We're just like, no, that's not appropriate for me. So I'm not going to engage that. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny. You know, how they, even in magazines, they're like, if you're this age, it's not appropriate for you to dress like this. And I just thought like, well, that's not interesting. You know, I just find that fascinating. You know, it's like someone else should tell us how we should dress.
Yeah.
You know, because it's not appropriate.
Yeah. And how we believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting as you move in, because since we're talking about it, into motherhood, and well, for me, because I have two boys, right? And that moment of being pregnant, when you have your big round belly, for those moments, you actually do feel the power of the feminine. You know, I mean, I don't want to exclude men. I love men. I love my husband. I love my two boys, you know. But there is a moment where it is just me and this force that I've had the privilege to move into in a human form, you know, and this creation and this life force that's growing inside my belly, you know. And it's kind of sad that that moment gets kind of lost because you're busy, you know, nurturing. And for me, I took it as a huge responsibility having kids because, you know, I saw this as a future generation in the making, you know. So it was like, right, I got to be on my A game. But then I forgot everything else.
Like yourself.
Myself, you know, my husband, you know.
Yeah, happens a lot.
It's just, and because it's kind of expected as well, you know, this, again, because we didn't, for me, how I see it, it looks like we didn't move into relationship with the male and the female and learn how to exchange this temptress energy, you know, so that when we move into the nurturing energy, that two people can do it together, right?
Yep. I just want to make it really clear to people. You do not have to have birthed children to embody the mother. Okay, so I don't have children. And the mother, what I'm talking about in this archetype, so there's a couple of things that Fiona's mentioned. So one is the nurturing, okay? In our culture, we negate the temptress. Like, oh, no, we're done. We've had babies. Temptress finished. Let's close that sucker down, right? Right? Or unless, you know, there's in moments in private, you know, with the husband or partner or whatever it is that you have. Okay. The other thing about the mother energy that I find really fascinating that women can really embody is in that creation. So in that space of the mother, you actually are embodying the void into the fertile void, right? You actually, the womb space is that space of absolute potential, absolute nothing. And then from there comes form. That is the void, and it's an embodiment in the birth process. And then you come into this space of inspiration. So for that's, to me, part of the mother. And in that energy of birthing, I mean, you can birth a child, you can birth a movement, you can birth a book, you can birth creativity, you can birth all kinds of things, right? It doesn't have to be a child. And I feel like that maternal energy is not just, nurturing is very, very underappreciated, my feeling is, right? Because it's like nurturing a flame, you know, it takes a long time to create fire from the thing. You know, you have to like blow in it, cultivate it, let it grow. It's similar with the child, you know, you have to be, right? Or a project or a business or a movement or whatever it is that you're growing, right? You're fostering this thing. And the other thing that I want to mention about the mother that people don't talk about very much is the champion. Because that's what we talked about at the beginning, right? It's just like, how strong do you want your children to be? Well, you're always coddling them, then they're never going to be strong. And the thing is, most mothers, obviously not all, but most mothers want whatever it is they're birthing to be strong, like their children, right? So whether it's a human or a project or a business, you want it to thrive. And so it's like, how do you champion those around you? And I feel like this is a very feminine thing because it's about empowering, right? It's like, how do you empower those beings, those systems, those projects that you're birthing?
Yeah.
You know, how do you make it better?
Yeah. And as you're saying that, even just in this present reality, but also taking the larger perspective, what you're doing impacts the collective, right?
Totally.
And how you want to move forward as a collective. So it's, for me, it's interesting to have that personal view and then at the same time have the bigger view and recognize, well, how I impact this is going to impact this, you know? So it's also part of that whole mother, nurture, creator, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Holding the bigger dream for the collective. And the other thing too is like, when we get to mother, right? Because it's, you know, in a human's life, it's really like as you grow up, really, as you age. And the little girl, when you get to mother, in self, I'm not talking about you and your children, in yourself, is allowed to come out and play a little bit because now you have children with whom you interact, yes? So you can return to the little girl. If you don't have kids, it's still like really not that appropriate because do you know what I mean? It's like the little girl is like put aside for, you know, when she was little, but like here you are as a woman, you've got your career, your business, your studies, your whatever scientific research paper, whatever it is that you're creating. And the little girl is like, no time for her. You know, she's that play, that mischief, the magic, all that stuff. She's kind of like frivolous, She's not as important. And then the temptress is not appropriate in many circumstances. So as we get into all these stages, it's about embracing all of these three things within you and understanding the wisdom of all these three aspects. You are all of these aspects.
What does it do to us at a frequency level when we're negating these things?
Yeah, so when we negate, thank you for asking that. So when we negate those things, we actually drop our resonance, okay? Because we're resisting an aspect of ourselves. So you came into embodiment to experience humanness. You chose to experience it through the feminine for people, for, you know, in what we're discussing, right? Some people chose to experience through the masculine. We're talking about the feminine in this particular case. So your exploration of the feminine is really about how do you embody that? And when you negate certain of these aspects, you actually diminish yourself, because the potential is for you to actually experience each of these stages and celebrate each of these aspects in yourself and in others, actually. And so when we negate those aspects, like I said, you drop in your frequency resonance, because it's like you're resisting, fighting, you know, diminishing, whatever it is. And it can create a lot of friction and suffering, actually, in us, which isn't great.
And I've found, you know, again, because I'm, you know, moved beyond that, I realize now the more fun I can have when I actually do acknowledge and embrace them.
Yeah.
How much more creative I can be.
Yes,
you know?
exactly.
And then life's not so serious anymore.
Yeah. And it's fun.
Yeah.
As you say, it's a lot more fun. And it's because you're free in the clarity of each of these aspects, you get to play with them. Like you say, like you can try it on, like, you know, today I'm expressing whatever. And we're in this moment. You're not really thinking about that. You're not like, and at this moment I'm expressing my little girl. I mean, you're not doing it. But you can move into that playful wonder, mischief, whatever, very easily. And it lights people up. Or maybe it's sexy time and you can mix that with a little bit of the little girl. And you know what I mean? Like you can mix all these things together in a way that makes life just a lot more juicy and fun.
Harmonious.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so now let's get to my favorite.
Yeah, my favorite one too.
Yeah, right. And it's kind of hard to express that.
Yeah.
As you say, because of all the distortions, it's really hard to express that to people that are not there.
Yeah.
Because it's this thing that they're scared of.
Yeah. Women are afraid to age because we're told that when we're old, we're not beautiful and therefore we're not valuable.
That's right. Yeah.
Don't get me started.
And the message is everywhere.
Oh, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's just shocking. You know, I remember being told once, or hearing once, about grey hair. You know, and sure, you'd think she'd get her hair dyed. This was from a woman. And I remember just like being absolutely shocked. How do you even recognize what you're saying?
Yeah.
You know, if she wants to be with her beautiful grey hair, let her be.
Yeah.
If you want to colour yours, great.
Yeah.
But do we have to criticize each other?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
No, it's true.
Because she wanted this woman to maintain the image of not being in her crone and somehow hanging on for dear life.
To the temptress. Yeah. The crone and the wise woman. So I have always known, ever since I don't know why I've known this, but ever since I was in my 20s, I would look at women who were older, especially ones who did not fall into the distortion so hard of around the temptress and who embraced more of their crone or their wise woman. I was like, women get more powerful as they age. You can see it in them. And I actually would look forward to that. I'm like, wow, that's amazing, because the crone or the wise woman has wisdom. That's her state. She also has, as you and I have talked about, neutrality, because she has the ability to look over what, you know, around her as to what's happened and have the wisdom of this journey into the crone and to the wise woman and through her children and her community. And, you know, the feminine is very communal, you know, inclusive. And so when you're in the stage of the wise woman, that's like the reaping of that wisdom and the cultivation of it. And we get to be in it now because we get to live longer. We get to cultivate that even more. And it's sort of amazing to me. I remember watching this woman who was older. I didn't even know her. She walked into a restaurant that I happened to be in, and she had this silver hair, you know, that she had like, it was loose, actually. She didn't tie it up. She had it loose around her. And I can't even remember exactly what it was, but there's something about the way she walked into that room, and everyone kind of did this, when she walked in, because she wasn't trying to be like, look at me, I'm sexy time. She just had this confidence, like, I know who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. Am I growing? Sure. But you know what I mean? There's like a self-possession or like a confidence in her own grace that was really beautiful to watch. And she was captivating. And she wasn't particularly thin or booby or like, you know what I mean? Like she wasn't any of that like culturally defined, this is what beauty is. What she was herself.
Yeah.
And it was really, really amazing to watch her.
In her empowerment.
Yes.
Yeah.
In her empowerment.
Yeah.
Not trying to please anyone. She just was who she was.
Yeah. Embracing it, being in neutrality. Yeah. And isn't it just about loving the very experience of having this physical body? And and it's like a dictionary, what am I saying? A library wisdom that you've collected along the way. And when you reach that point where you can actually say, no, go back to that one, pull that one out. It's all there. It's all there. You know?
And the wonderful thing is if we're empowered in our wise woman, we come to the point where we don't really care that people are judging us because we pull out temptress or that we're playing like the little girl or that we particularly are maternal or nourishing or whatever. You know, it doesn't, all those things are just who we are. You know, it's amazing to watch women. Some women get to it a little bit later than others, but they're just like, I'm older now. I've earned this. Whatever. I'm just going to enjoy myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I really love it when women get to that point.
Yeah, you keep yakking in the corner. Yeah. I'm going to live this life.
Yeah, exactly.
So, my next question really, I guess it's the summation of what we've talked about. So, like, what's the point? We're having this discussion. We're talking about the 4 stages and passages and the distortions that are through each. So what's ultimately the big deal in all this? You know?
So to me, there has been so much oppression in the past millennia, plural, of the masculine over the feminine and the feminine over the feminine. Women can be very terrible to each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it is time now to clarify both the masculine and the feminine. It's not like the female and the feminine's journey on its own. There's a lot in the masculine to clarify as well. So as we clarify these aspects of ourselves, we get to celebrate our humanness. You know, these things that make us who we are as humans. And they're not perfection. They're not supposed to be. They're messy and sometimes like a little bit like, whoa, challenging, you know what I mean? But when we clarify that and we start to accept all these aspects are ourselves, and say, for example, if you're in your temptress stage, to be open to and receptive to the wise woman, not only outside of you, but within you, that's a wonderful thing because now we have women who are starting to be empowered.
Yeah.
And who are starting to realize that they get to express their humanness in this particular form, which is the feminine.
Yeah.
And there is something really beautiful about that because instead of trying to resist it, right? Like I have to get my ass like lifted. I have to have no tummy. I have to have a boob size. I have to make my face like that, whatever. My hair a certain color, all that stuff. That's all surface. It's distracting you from your power of who you can be as this force, as you say, of the feminine, of that creation, the receptivity, the inspiration, the one who like gathers other people together, the one who creates community, the one who creates warmth and love in the home, like all that stuff is glorious. And as we clarify this in ourselves and release the distortion, it's like we celebrate that.
Yeah.
You know, and what happens then is those in community with us start to rise because we have that in our frequency resonance, you know, and when you are expressing that, part of the feminine through the mother actually, and the crone to some degree, is to empower others. It's very much in the feminine. It's not like, you know, what is that old saying, you know, teach a man to fish and he'll feed himself, and you teach a woman to fish and she'll feed a village, or something like this. I'm sure I'm not getting the quote right exactly, but it's something having to do with this very strong impulse in the feminine to empower. And so for me, this is the potential of all of us. And women, you know, not just women, the feminine We have for so long competed against each other for
Yeah.
a scarce resource because we were not empowered. It truly is time for us to release this competition, right? To come into a state where we're like, okay, we're empowered. I acknowledge your strengths and weaknesses. I acknowledge my strengths and weaknesses. How can we come together and lift ourselves up collectively?
Yeah.
You know, and if I don't like you, that's okay. I don't have to drag you down either.
That's
you know,
right.
we agree to disagree, or
Yep.
whatever it is. You know, so
Yeah. And I would just add in there, just through my own experience, there is something that does resonate in each passage, and you can see that when somebody has the sensitivity to the fact that this is their next passage that's coming, they will be drawn to that woman, and then they'll want to sit and be in the resonance of that person. It's almost like they have this sixth sense. This is coming. What does it feel like? Okay, how do I need to prepare? It would be really lovely for us to have circles, you know, come back and have circles where we could all sit in community. I would have grown up with that, in community, where you got a sense of what's coming.
yes,
Okay, who's there? Okay, I can go to them when I have questions, you know.
yeah,
Just to, like you say, to empower.
yes,
And let's get over these distortions as quickly as possible.
yes,
Let's have this equality between man, woman, male, feminine. In fact, just let's drop the labels, you know.
yeah, exactly. And so that we can celebrate each other and our unique expression of self.
Yeah.
And, you know, we don't think of ourselves necessarily as leaders, but as you clarify, you embody that.
Yeah.
So you'll find that more people come to be around you, to be in the clarity of the resonance, you to have like a little bit of a sample of like, oh, well, that's what it feels like in this particular person, in this particular clarity. It gives them an option that is not very prevalent yet.
Yeah.
Of what it is to be at that level of clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was some journey that we just had there. And I'm sure we could go on for a long time.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
And I know this whole discussion was never about excluding the masculine.
No.
Never. And it was really just an understanding of what these 4 stages are and why they're so important and how we can make them successful, right, as we go forward. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if you want to start clarifying the feminine within, then I strongly suggest that you watch or listen to the group frequency calibration meditation associated with this episode. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please click the like button or the thumbs up button below. And if you want to hear about when the next episode of Mastering Your World Through Frequencies is live, or when I go live on YouTube, then please click the subscribe button below. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.